Ouais. Ah oui. Juste la feuille. Ouais. Bon, bonjour à tous. On est maintenant au complet. On va pouvoir commencer avec un petit peu de retard. Désolé, c'était indépendant de notre volonté. Donc, on va pouvoir assister à la soutenance de thèse de Jeanne Hecquard. Nous avons le jury à délibérer, et donc ce sera Madame Catherine Pellachot qui sera présidente de ce jury, et je vais lui donner la parole pour qu'elle présente le jury. Ouais. Il est bloqué sur son script.
Bonjour, bien désolé, mon train a été annulé à Paris, donc il a fallu prendre celui qui était en face, mais qui était beaucoup plus long. Donc voilà, alors c'est pas drôle, j'avoue, de vous faire attendre, mais c'était un peu indépendant de ma volonté. Donc alors les membres du jury, on va commencer par les rapporteurs. Il y a Thomas Pietrax, qui est professeur à l'Université de Lille. I'm sorry, I've been talking in French. Maybe I should switch to English. So there's also Professor Kauta Minamizawa, which is a professor at Keio University in Japan. There is for the examinateur, there's Rochelle Ackerley, directrice de recherche CNRS. Le directeur de thèse est Marc Massé, chargé de recherche CNRS ici. Anatole Lecuyer, directeur de recherche INRIA. Il y en a beaucoup. Ferran Arguelaguet, qui est chargé de recherche à l'INRIA. Et aussi Justine Saint-Aubert, qui est chargée de recherche CNRS. Et moi-même, qui suis directrice de recherche CNRS à la Sorbonne. So you have 45 minutes presentation, I guess, and then we go with questions.
Okay. So thank you, Madam President. And thank you, everyone, for coming here to listen to me for 45 minutes straight. I'll try to be interesting. And thank you for coming to witness the defense of my thesis, titled Modulating Social Perception During Virtual Interactions with Effective Haptic Feedback. So, to start with, okay, the camera should disappear anytime soon. Okay, cool. So to start with, I'd like to go over the title a little bit. So there are three main parts. Social perception, which is the identification and interpretation of social cues to determine how to interact with our interlocutor. So basically, how you perceived the person who is talking to you, who is interacting with you. Second, those social interactions are going to take place in virtual reality, so virtual interactions. And we are going to see how to augment, enhance them with effective haptic feedback, which is the eliciting, enhancing, or influencing of the emotional state of a human being through their sense of touch. So, social interactions. First up, social interactions are necessary for everyone. We need them for our well-being. Second, social interactions, to be successful, they require positive social cues. And finally, social cues may be complex to use in virtual environments. So we can see further in the thesis how we try to modulate that. What are social cues? Well, for example, we have language and paralanguage. So what you say to someone, how you say it, vocal tone, etc., sarcasm. You have gaze, facial expression, body language, how you look at the person. Proxemics, it's how the space is perceived between two people interacting. So you have different spaces for different levels of relationship between two people. The intimate space is, of course, for very close people. The public space is for people you don't know, you're not even really talking to them. And last but not least is touch. So social touch is defined by some researchers like Shermer and colleagues as a gentle physical contact between individuals. And the idea here is, well, it's a paramount social cue. It's not even defined as a social cue by certain researchers. It can be used as a tool rather than a signal. And we can see further in the thesis how we can use that to maybe modulate the social perception of those other cues. For interactions in VR, since we've defined simple face-to-face interactions, well, interactions in virtual reality, they can change quite a bit. So this is an example of a virtual reality social media platform, VR Chat. And as you can see, people use virtual avatars that can differ quite a bit from human bodies. And so the effect of that is that cues can be lacking or even absent. So, for example, you don't really necessarily have the gaze of the person, the body language may be quite different. Facial expressions for a banana, what is that? A lot of cues can be missing. And moreover, you can also interact with virtual agents, which are so artificial entities that can act differently from humans. And in that context, the European project GuestXR was funded. Its goal was to facilitate social interactions, helping avert conflict, easing interactions in virtual environment, and making it easier for people with communications problems to get involved and detect antisocial behavior. All of that, and as part of the project, INRIA's aim was to investigate the use of effective haptic devices to add social touch back in virtual reality. Sorry, I have to take a break. So we chose to work on this subject by using the multitude of different haptic cues that can be perceived during an interactions. So you have proprioception, which is here you have proprioception, which is the perception of where our body are, our movements, vibrations, which I don't think I have to explain, pressure sensitivity, skin deformations that can happen when you touch something on where you are touched, and finally temperature, which the temperature of a human skin can be quite different from regular objects. So I've tried to introduce the subject a little bit, and I hope it worked. And next up, I'd like to talk a bit about related works and how the thesis can be included in them. And then next up, I'd like to talk about my contributions as part of perception of the self and perception of the other during a virtual interaction. And finally, of course, I'd like to conclude and talk about perspectives. So for the related works, I have two main parts, which are characterizing a bit more effective haptic feedback and devices that can be used in virtual reality. And in the second part, more on the impact of social touch. So how can it be used to modulate social perception and how it can impact behavior? First, effective haptic devices are commonly divided into two groups, which are mediated effective touch and artificial effective touch. The first one being the ability of one actor to touch another actor over a distance by means of tactile or kinesthetic feedback technology. In other words, two people interacting through a haptic device remotely. And the second part is the artificial effective touch, and it's an interaction with artificial entities. So it can be a virtual agent or a robot, all kinds of, but the idea is there is one user. And in our thesis, we mostly focus on artificial affective touch by using virtual agents. But still, I wanted to present both. And here are some examples. The first one being Hapti Hug by Tsetsuruku. And it's a compressive belt that wraps around the abdomen. And by using silicone hands, you can simulate a hug. And the author used it to simulate a hug over a distance between two users. For artificial affective touch, we generally have, again, two groups, which are artificial pets and interactions with artificial agents, artificial robots, all these kind of things. So here is Petit Kubo, which is weird-looking pet. It's not really an animal, but it's soft, it can purr, it's warm. And the second one is a virtual agent that could touch users through a silicone hand that could heat up. And that was the interaction with the virtual agent. Effective haptic devices can also compensate or enhance other social cues that can be lacking in virtual reality. So as we saw earlier, facial expressions, body language, they can be hard to translate through virtual space, whether virtual reality or video conference, for example. So here is an example of that, Temperature of the Room by Halliburton and colleagues. And here it was actually my situation where someone is doing a presentation and some of the audience is online, and so they can't necessarily see their faces or it's farther away from a screen. And so they were a small thermoelectric cell that could transmit the emotional state, so facial expression, body language, the impression of the audience through the small device. And so warm was interested, cold was disinterested, and they created this connection through that. There are other examples, of course. For example, the haptic biosignals by Ames and colleagues, which use thermoelectric cells again, so thermal feedback, to modulate the perception of proxemic distances between users and a virtual agent in virtual reality. And finally, we have two examples of devices for the enhancement of paralanguage, where this one is the multi-emoji to enhance textual messages. So the tone of the message would be enhanced by vibrotactile and thermal actuators. So you would receive warmth and cold, and also vibrations to express the intensity, but also the pleasantness of the message. And similarly, here by Elali and colleagues, there was a vest that was specifically designed to enhance vocal messages. So similarly, you would transmit the pleasantness and intensity of the message, but for vocal messages. So I've tried to present a bit of everything that can be done with effective haptic devices. And now I'd like to touch specifically on the impact of that social touch that we can use. First up is the Midas touch effect. It's a phenomenon where a casual touch could promote positive effect, concern for the other, and prosocial behavior. So it's a theory that is somewhat controversial, but I think is paramount for the rest of the thesis. And notably, how it would work is it modulates social perception, and by that create connections between people, and so influence behavior. Here are 3 examples of the process. So the first one is by Saint-Aubert and colleagues, where the authors enhanced a virtual agent's voice with synchronized vibrotactile feedback that was based on the speech of the agent. And that feedback led to an increase in leadership, persuasion, and co-presence. Second, on creating connection, is the same paper I presented earlier by Hope and colleagues, where they simulated a virtual touch by a virtual agent. So here you can see the examiner actually touching the participants, and that touch enhances actually the human likeness of the agents touching them in virtual reality. And finally, here, this experiment by Hans and colleagues used the virtual Midas touch to induce helping behavior through that touch. So we've seen how haptic devices can be used to connect people at a distance, how they can be used to compensate or enhance lacking social cues, and how social touch can possibly impact connections and behavior through virtual reality. And here I'd like to introduce my contribution for the thesis and how maybe they can fit into this literature. So first up would be modulating the social perception of the self with effective haptic feedback. And so for the first contribution, we have modulating the perception of the personal space, so personal space boundaries, and how haptic feedback can change that. Second would be modulating the emotional state of users during a cognitively induced stress. Second part would be modulating the perception of the other during an interaction, with the third contribution being the transmission of the other's emotional state, and specifically physically feeling the stress of another being. Fourth contribution on social perception during verbal interactions and how haptic feedback can enhance verbal cues. And final contribution on using simulated social touch to impact prosocial behavior. First up, small break. For our first contribution, as I said, the question was, can we use haptic feedback to modulate the personal space boundaries? So those personal space boundaries, we already know that they can be modulated by factors such as culture. So different cultures can get closer to strangers than others, but also the appearance of the person approaching you, the context of that approach. All kinds of cues can modulate that space. So maybe haptic feedback can also modulate it. And that's how we design our experiment, where users were seated in and wearing a compressive belt that you can see here that could compress around their abdomen. And they were immersed in a virtual dark alley where agents would approach them. So either the agent was looking angry or the agent was looking neutral. And when they felt uncomfortable that the agent was too close, they could stop them by pressing a button. And that whole protocol was designed in collaboration with Wojtek Smekal from Maastricht University. So our hypothesis for this experiment were that the visual cues of the virtual agent's emotional state would affect a user's personal space boundaries, but that also augmenting the agent's social cues with haptic feedback would affect those personal space boundaries. For the haptic feedback, we based our design on a previous experiment by Mulek and colleagues, and this is the belt here. So the servo motor that could rotate was attached to a backplate, and then that backplate was attached to the user's abdomen. Attached to the servo motor was an elastic band that could wrap with the motor rotating and then compress the abdomen. Here is the whole protocol of the experiment. So users went through 240 repetitions, including all experimental conditions. Here's the agent in the neutral approach, And here is the agent with the angry approach. So he's looking a bit drunk, a bit aggressive. For our results, we visualize the results by terms of personal space boundaries, but the idea is that users feeling uncomfortable sooner meant pressing the button sooner. And so we visualized it as the personal space boundaries increasing in size. And so here you can see this is the control condition where the agent was neutral and there were no haptics. And then increasing in size is neutral agents but with haptics, angry agent but with no haptics. And finally, the bigger space boundaries are angry agents with haptic. And so we can see that the haptic feedback did impact the personal space boundaries, and that the combination of the agent's anger and the activated haptic feedback had the strongest effect. To conclude, haptic feedback can impact personal space boundaries in virtual environments, and the results highlight the potential of haptic devices to modulate social perception in VR settings. Second contribution, which we will go over quickly because I don't have time to present all contributions equally. This experiment was done with the objective of working on lowering stress during cognitively intense tasks, since that stress can negatively impact social interactions. And how we tried to work on that was using thermal feedback on the back of users during that task. And what we found was that some results did support cold feedback as a relaxation tool for cognitively intense situations. And overall, the results do highlight the importance of user preferences. Part 2, perception of the other. Small break. Third contribution on modulating the emotional state and transmitting that emotional state to users. So the idea was to physically feel the stress of a virtual agent here. And the idea was, well, can we use physiologically based feedback, the feedback that could recreate physical sensations, to convey the physical sensations of emotions, and so foster connections and empathy between two beings. And here is the virtual presenter, so a virtual agent, whose emotions, so physical emotions, were transmitted to users through two haptic devices. And the idea was to connect the participants to that virtual presenter through a simulation of her physical state. So that presenter, she was doing, well, a presentation like me, and like me, she was feeling a little stressed, except like me, there were technical issues, and the audience was being mean, which I hope you won't. And so she was feeling really stressed, and that physical state of her emotions was transmitted to participants through two haptic devices. And the first one being the haptic belt, the compressive belt I presented earlier. And the second one being a small piezoelectric disc wrapped around the wrist, and that would pulse in rhythm with the heartbeat. So we chose to try two conditions for the haptic feedback, either transmitting the physical stress of the presenter, so with dynamic feedback, when she was feeling more stressed, the heartbeat and the breathing rate would accelerate, or we would transmit the constant indifferent physical state of, for example, another colleague in the audience, someone not connected to the presenter. And each user went through both conditions in changing order. The idea was that the dynamic feedback would lead to users feeling more empathetic and connected to the presenter. that the dynamic feedback would lead to them feeling more anxiety and stress, and that it would lead to them feeling more immersed and present within the virtual environment. For the results, they were contrasted, so I'm not presenting everything, but we had some good participant preferences in terms of anxiety mostly, but also immersion and empathy felt. So here is you felt more anxiety when the feedback was constant, and here is you felt more anxiety when the feedback was dynamic. So when it was coherent with the virtual presenter's emotions. Overall, stress relief and anxiety can be communicated through effective virtual feedback, and the results do highlight the potential of empathetic haptics for positive social interactions in VR settings. Fourth contribution, enhancing verbal cues and social perception during a verbal interaction. So, I haven't presented everything from the literature that we studied in the thesis, but notably an idea that came often was the association of warmth and positive social perception. And so what we wanted to study during this experiment was, could warm thermal feedback positively influence social perception in virtual reality with haptic devices? And also, how would it combine with different haptic feedback that had been used previously, like vibrotactile feedback? So we divided the questions into two experiments, the first one being solely on thermal feedback, and the second combining warm thermal feedback and vibrotactile feedback. And so participants were immersed in a simple virtual meeting room where they were sitting face-to-face with a virtual agent who spoke to them about a very non-controversial subject, writing pens. So which pen is your favorite to write with? And so they listened to 3 different agents who each spoke about a different pen. And the idea was to convince users that their pen was the best to write with, and that you should definitely choose that one. And for each agent presenting a pen, users perceived a different haptic feedback. And the question was, well, how would the feedback influence their perception of the speech? We thought that both vibrotactile and warm feedback would enhance persuasion, and that also the combination of warmth and vibrotactile would do best. We also thought that vibrations would enhance focus and co-presence, and finally that the warm feedback would most enhance the perceived friendliness. Here is the whole protocol. So we did a small thermal calibrations to get people's preferred temperatures. And then users went 3 times through the whole process of listening to someone or receiving haptic feedback, and also answering a few questions on that monologue. And then at the full end of the experiment, ranking the agents. So the thermal feedback, I don't think I have to present. It's warm and cool. I'll have specifications later. But for the vibrotactile feedback, we used vibrotactile feedback synchronized with the speech of the agent. So here you can see an example.
Les stylos à billes sont comme ces stylos ordinaires que l'on voit par tous ceux qui sont toujours là quand on en a besoin.
Right. So you can see the speech changing with the waves, and so that's how the vibrations worked in the hand of the user. For the first experiments, we had a validation of our hypothesis on persuasion. So agents with warm feedback were most persuasive. And for the second experiment, we had a bit more dimension. So for persuasion, all feedback types did augment the persuasion, which was coherent with the literature and the first experiment. But the combination of warmth and vibrotactile feedback did enhance the persuasion the most. Also for co-presence, so the perceived presence of the agent in the virtual room, the vibrations did have the most impact on that perception. We also had a small trend, so non-significant impact on the focus of the participants on the agent. And finally, warm feedback had a strong impact, a strong significant impact on the perception of the agent's friendliness. And what was interesting is that the vibrations actually decreased that perception, because as you can see here, the warm feedback is significantly different from the warmth and vibrotactile feedback. And so overall, we can remember that warmth did increase persuasion and friendliness, and that vibrotactile feedback did increase persuasion, focus, and co-presence. There were some correlations between the dimensions of friendliness and persuasion with warm feedback, and focus, co-presence, and persuasion with vibrations. Here's a small citation from one of the participants. Final contribution on the simulated social touch to enhance prosocial behavior. Before introducing the experiment, I'd like to introduce a small phenomenon called the bystander effect. And the idea is that when you're in a public space with people around and someone has an accident, someone is being harassed, someone needs help, well, the first thing people will do is look around and think, well, if someone else is around, why should I help? Why do I need to do something? And so the idea is when you're in public, you're less likely to help. And so it has been studied a lot by researchers, notably in virtual reality, with the idea of modulating the bystander effect through other factors. This is an example of that, so by Rovier and Slater, where they used social identity groups to modulate that effect. And so here is the victim, so the virtual agent acting as the victim. And that victim was a very big fan of the Manchester Football Club in the UK. And participants were recruited specifically to be also very big fan of that football club. And so both the victim and participants would start speaking a bit and becoming, well, kind of fast friends by being fans of the same thing. And then a second agent, the harasser, the perpetrator, would start and arrive and look at the victim and be like, well, I don't like your shirt. Manchester is stupid. I hate football. You look stupid. All kinds of harassments. And the idea was that when participants shared that social identity group, then they helped the victim more. And so we can see that the social identity groups did help modulate that effect. Our question is, can we use social touch instead of social identity? And so we designed an experiment with a similar subject. So the protocol was designed in collaboration with Mel Slater from the University of Barcelona. And so the idea was that the victim would come up to participants and touch them on the arm lightly to get their attention. And then after speaking a bit, the victim would start to be harassed by another virtual agent. And then we would see the behavior of participants. Our conditions were control. There was no touch. The agent just simply kept his hands at his side while attracting verbally the attention. Or there was a visual touch on the arm, or the touch was both haptic and visual. So while the agent touched the participant on the arm, the device that they were on the arm applied a light, warm pressure. Our hypotheses were that participants would be more proactive in their help if they were touched visually or both visually and haptically by the victim, that participants would feel more connected and closer socially to the victim if they were touched by him, And finally, that H2 and H1 would have stronger effects if the touch was also tactile compared to visual only. For the haptic feedback, we used a device designed in collaboration with Danilo Troisi from the University of Siena. And so the device was worn on the forearm, and a small motor, a rotating motor, was attached to a plate. That motor could rotate the Peltier cell, so the thermoelectric cell, attached to an arm. And attached to that arm was also a force sensor that could modulate the force pushed onto the arm. So we used that device to apply a force of 2 newtons for 3 seconds with a temperature of around 38 degrees. So 38 degrees being approximately human skin. Here is the video of...
Salut, comment ça va? Salut, comment ça va?
Okay. So that was the agent attracting the attention while touching the arm. And so for the whole protocol, users went only through the experiment once to avoid biases. And so after a small embodiment exercise and the calibration of the device regarding the force control, we had the meeting with the first agent, either with no touch or visual touch or haptic and visual touch. And then after talking a bit, the second agent arrived, starting harassing users.
Oh, tu nous dis quoi faire là maintenant?
Non, je savais pas que c'était ton bar.
Ouais, c'est le mien, ok?
Non, non, écoute, c'est pas ce que je voulais dire. Juste, va boire ta pinte et on passera à autre chose.
Alors maintenant, tu me dis quoi faire?
C'est pas très grave.
Ouais, et tu te prends pour qui là? T'es chef maintenant?
Ah, mais bon, fais gaffe, je cherche pas dans l'histoire.
Je vais te montrer des ennuis, moi, si t'arrêtes pas de faire comme si t'étais le monsieur parfait, là. Hein?
Bon, d'accord, désolé, mec.
So here's a small extract of the harassment of the victim by the perpetrator. And during that time, users had an implicit choice of action. So we didn't give them any guidance on how they had to behave. We simply told them they could do what they wanted. They could watch or they could act. There was no obligation of anything. And so some users watched, some users tried to help in different ways. And then after the experiment, we asked them a few questions on their perception. For the behavioral results, so this is all preliminary because we just did the experiment, so the analysis is not fully fledged out. But first, for the first results, this is the number if participants did try to intervene. So for each condition, if they did anything, so gestural movement, if they tried to stand between the two agents, if they said anything, if they tried to call for help, anything was noted down. And so 100% of the participants who were touched haptically and visually tried to help. So that's 17 out of the 51. Whereas only 60% did in the visual only condition and 40% did in the no touch condition. When they did try to help, we counted the number of times, and on average, the number of time they acted was double compared to untouched or visually touched participants. So if, for example, someone in the haptic condition tried to help 10 times, so try to call for help twice, try to do something, try to talk to the victim or to the perpetrator in total 10 times, then on average, the visually touched participants tried 5 times. Here are the participants' movement throughout the aggression. So here is the no touch condition, here is the visual touch condition, and here is the haptic and visual condition. So as you can see, haptic condition participants did step closer on average to the victim and the perpetrator. And these are the results of the participant perception during the experiment. And for both participants with the visual condition and participants with the haptic and visual condition, we asked them, well, when the agent touched you, what did it feel like? Was it believable? Was it comforting, creepy, foreign, human, out of place, so weird in the context, and realistic? How did you feel about that? And so here was not at all and fully agree, of course. And while the touch was not judged very realistic, especially with the haptic condition, it was believable enough for participants. So in the scenario, they felt, oh, okay, someone touched me. And while participants did not find the touch comforting or super comfortable, rather they felt it was foreign and out of place. So why is that person touching me? I don't know him. I've never met him. That's weird. But they didn't find it creepy either. They just felt it was a bit weird. This is actually, I think, pretty interesting because while the haptic touch did have an impact on the prosocial behavior and the helping behavior, it was not socially comfortable for participants. So they didn't like the touch, but still impacted their behavior. So I think that's a question for future works, but we'll discuss more on the paper we have to write. So all contributions were presented. For reminder, this thesis was on the social perception during virtual interactions with affective haptic feedback. And so for that, we have 5 different contributions that I just presented. The first one being on modulation of the personal space boundaries. The objective was to investigate the influence of haptic feedback on personal space boundaries. And what we found was that haptic feedback did enhance and increase the size of the personal space boundaries. Second was on the influence of thermal feedback on stress levels and performance during a cognitively induced stress. And the takeaways are that user preference had a strong impact, but haptic feedback did play a role in stress reduction and user enjoyment. Third contribution, the objective was to investigate the potential of physiologically based haptic feedback as a way of creating connections and fostering empathy between a user and a virtual presenter. And as a takeaway, physiologically based haptic feedback did have a potential for connecting users in virtual environments. Fourth contribution, on investigating the influence of thermal and vibrotactile feedback on the social perception of virtual agent speeches. And we found that warmth did increase friendliness and persuasion, whereas vibrations increased persuasion, focus, and co-presence, and even slightly decreased friendliness. Final contribution on investigating the influence of a simulated social touch on the bystander helping behavior of participants during a harassment simulation. As a takeaway, the virtual social touch did have a strong effect on the prosocial behaviors. That's a lot of things to talk about, and while we did answer some questions, I feel like it actually raised a lot more. I think that's pretty common in research. So I have a lot of perspectives for the future, notably a few short-term perspectives for each paper. So the first one, where we investigated the modulation of personal space boundaries, we found that the space boundaries were increased in size by the haptic feedback. But the question is, did the haptic feedback impact the personal space boundaries, like the perceived compression of them? Or is it simply that participants perceived the haptic feedback as a modulation of the agent's social cues. So with the haptic feedback, they were like, oh, he is more angry, for example, or he's approaching closer. And so that's a question that I think we should investigate later on. And also, well, we used compression feedback here with the compressive belt, but I think we can explore other types of haptic feedback to modulate the personal space boundaries. Second, so here we found that the user preference were really important in using the thermal feedback to reduce stress. And so I think we should further investigate the importance of the user preferences. Third contribution, we use the physiologically based haptics to connect users to a virtual presenter. And I'd like to use it to enhance social synchronicity, and for example, between two users. And also, I think that since we proved that we can convey stress, I think it could be used during as a tool for therapy. So, for example, cognitive behavioral therapy, which is very centered on the physical sensation of your emotions and how to grow past them. Fourth contribution, we had, I think, a significant association of warmth and friendliness, which is common in the literature, and I think we should explore that association in virtual spaces more. Also, in the experiment, we only use a very, well, it's not really a haptic device. It was simply a thermoelectric cell that we touched with the finger. I don't think it can even be called a device. And so there's the question, well, it still had an effect. And so maybe we should evaluate the need for contextual realism for the haptic feedback. It wasn't even linked, like we had an empty mug next to the hand, and participants didn't even link it to, like I think one participant asked maybe it was hot coffee, but the mug was empty. So yes, the haptic feedback need to have a context in the virtual environment for it to have an effect. And finally, the fifth contribution did raise the question of, well, if the touch is not comfortable, socially acceptable, does it still have an effect, and why? Of course, I have more questions. During this thesis, we focused on interactions with virtual agents. It allowed us to control a lot more the protocols, to reduce some biases, but of course it raised others. And so I think mediated interactions with human-to-human participants would also change results, but I don't know in what way. And the final question, what would be the ultimate social touch? So in this thesis, we use a lot of different haptic cues, thermal, vibrotactile, force. We also used it in different contexts and with different levels of realism. And so a lot of questions were raised from that. Does the touch need to be realistic? Does it need to feel human? What kind of feedback type should we use? What kind of combination? What results do you need from that touch? So do you need to enhance the friendliness, persuasion? A lot of questions. And that's it for me. So thank you for listening to me for 40 minutes. And I'm ready for questions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for remaining in times. So now we go with the question. As a tradition is we start with a person which is further away. So I'm going to ask Professor Kuta Minamizawa from KU University to intervene.
Right. Yep. Can you hear me? Yep. Yeah, thank you very much for very great presentation, and it's really inspiring that so you showed a various kind of the perspective of the social touch, and you did a lot of kind of the experiments. And also, it was also very interesting to hear how you tell this entire story, because Yeah, although there's, as you also mentioned that in the last part, so it's you use the various different type of the haptics on the different part. Actually, it's somehow also looks like various small experiments, but how you tell the entire story is very convincing. That so we can now understand that what kind of the your perspective of the social touch. Then I mainly have two questions at this moment. So one is that so I'm mostly interested in the final experiment about the social touch, kind of the how social touch engage the people to make a proactive kind of the behavior. So I think that's really kind of the somewhat different from the previous experiments, that it's not just about the human perception, but it's more about the how our behavior or how our mindset changing based on this kind of the social touch. So then my question is that, so what do you think about like one is probably I can divide into two questions. One is that the how you think about in the, for example, in the metaverse or in the VR communication environment, how you are thinking of bringing your current kind of the knowledge about how social touch induce the proactive behaviors. How you'd like to install that kind of the concept into the current social network, like a VR chat or even maybe Twitter or X. There's many kind of the online communication makes a lot of kind of the like a lot of kind of the anxieties, and also a lot of kind of the miscommunication happens. I would like to bring your idea into the current online communication. And the second question is that to think about how you apply your idea. They also mentioned that your current result includes various type of the different haptic modalities and also haptic devices. What do you think is the most ideal style of the haptic devices and the haptic stimuli to create a better like environment with having social touch?
Thank you. And thank you for the questions. So I'll try to respond. Please tell me if I'm on the wrong subject, or if I responded weirdly. So for the first question, if I understood correctly, was on integrating my ideas of social touch into virtual social platforms like VR chats. And I think it's a really interesting perspective, which it's true I didn't mention. Well, the idea of the Guest XR project, which funded my thesis, was notably on integrating those ideas into future virtual platforms like VR chat. And so hopefully in the future we can do that. I think there are lots of different ways. Well, as you can see with the contributions, we did have a lot of uses for social touch, depending on what you want to do. And I think if we're talking about the fifth contribution on the like direct social touch, I think because you need to wear the device for it to work. So you need to have the whole thing on you. So it can't really be strangers for now, I think. I think if we wanted to do that, we would need, for example, using vibrations that are in the VR controllers that would allow us to do some haptic feedback for anyone in the virtual space. And I think I need to, well, we need to study this because vibrations and warmth can have very different impacts, we've seen. So I don't know how it would work, but there have been some studies for the virtual Midas touch with vibrotactile feedback. And what they found was that it did have an impact also. And I think it's also, um, you feel seen, like when you're touched. A few participants notably said that to me during the last experiments. Being touched by the agent, you feel seen by him. And so you feel not necessarily like he's your friend or you're more socially connected, but more, you feel more like when someone's having a hard time and they look at you in the eyes. So you feel more like you should help, maybe. And I think that's doable. Having yeah, I well, of course we would need to test it, but that's my idea.
Yeah, thank you very
I
much. Mm.
okay. That I hope that
Yeah,
answered your question.
that you mean that so then like because you although you are using various kind of the different type of haptics, the vibrotactile still works or still helps to create this kind of a social touch.
I think well, for your second question on like the ideal style of haptic
Mhm.
feedback we can use, I may be biased, but I think warmth is the most social touch feedback,
Mhm.
um, because we associate warmth with a lot of positive ideas. So friendliness, love, family, proximity also, and vibrations, where it depends on the people, but some people find it aggressive sometimes. As we found with the experiment on the warmth and vibrotactile, some people did find it reduced the friendliness. So I think for the ideal social touch, if you want to do more connections, friendliness, warmth would be better. But I do think it depends a lot on the context of that touch. So what dimensions you want to enhance.
Mhm. Thank you very much. I have another question. So actually, today I'm in like one of the university hospital. We did a symposium with the university hospital, creating the new VR environment for the more like mental health. We are now starting to create a new research project about how this kind of the VR and the haptics can facilitate the people's mental well-being, especially for the people with having a depression or mental stresses. So especially about also it's also mostly about the fifth five fifth kind of last experiment. But how do you think about if people having some kind of the communication disorder or mental disorder, or probably PTSD or something, using your VR environment, it also affect to their real communications, because it's this kind of VR training or VR experiences. Is there any possibility to that kind of the proactive, make people proactive? It's also affected to their daily lives.
Yeah, I see what you mean. So like some VR training using social touch or the
Yeah,
devices I mentioned.
some kind of the
Yeah,
communication training, something. Yeah.
well, there are a lot of possibilities. For example, in the literature, there have been some studies, well, some papers on the fact that people with depression or anxiety disorders, they tend to trend more towards warm things on the daily basis. Well, that's all psychological papers, so I don't know how they would change today. But I think yeah, there could be some ideas of kind of moral support during doing VR training that could be used with social touch. And also on the more communication training, I can't say because it's a bit out of scope regarding my contributions, but I've read a few papers on the idea for autistic people, for example, of VR training for communication training in VR. And there have been a few papers on using haptics in different ways. So I think it's a definite possibility. Maybe it even has been done before, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think I agree that especially for the autistic children, they sometimes have a difficulty to understand this kind of the meaning of the social touch when they have something. But yeah, if you can enhance clarify what kind of the touch they should be feeling while they are doing the kind of social communications, probably that provides more clear understanding for the people to how they should kind of make a communication and how they act or how they make a social touch to the other peoples. I think that should be very interesting application scenarios that we can envision for the future. Yeah, thank you very much. And probably, that's a question from me so far at this moment.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now we turn. No, okay. Okay, sorry, today. Okay. So sorry. Next problem. Okay. So now the next person, I give the floor to Thomas Jetbach.
Yeah, I learned how to pronounce my name when I was 30 years old. Because I met my wife and she's Polish and she taught me how to pronounce my name. So it's Pietrzak. Yeah, and there is a lot of sh in Polish. Anyway.
I've never pronounced it correctly.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Me neither. For 30 years. Yeah, so first of all, I would like to congratulate you because you did a lot of experiments. Like it's rare to see that many experiments, and these are not easy experiments to do because I'm more used to interaction techniques, and once you have the technique, it's pretty straightforward. You compare to to a baseline. Provided you have good results, you have a paper, and that's it. But here it's difficult to have something like it's better like this. It's way better just because you do haptic feedback or whatever. It's difficult to grasp what is better, and there are so many factors that can affect the results. So I see how difficult is the work that you have done, and so congratulations. So I'll go through some of your work. Yeah, so for the cerebral feedback and cognitive tasks, so you stimulated the top of the back with temperature feedback. So do you think that the result could change depending on the body location of the stimulation?
Well, we chose. Sorry. Thank you. Thank you, and thank you for the question. We chose that particular location because we read some papers on the thermal perception in that part of the body specifically. The skin is pretty thin. You can feel it basically in the whole upper back if you put it here. So we felt it was a good location. But I think there are other locations where you could have a similar effect. The wrists are a pretty good location. The problem is with wrists, if you move your arms, there's a pretty good chance the device is going to move, and so that can change a lot the feedback. And well, of course, there are lots of different locations you can use, and I think this place was good because it moved less. Like you can move your shoulders, but not that much during the experiment itself. So I think, yeah, it was a good location because it moved less. They had a good perception. But yes, I do think in other areas where the skin is thicker, you would have more variability in perception from users. So for example, on the upper arm, the skin is a bit thicker, so perception is more different, and in general, it's lesser. So yeah, I think that would complicate things. So that's why we chose this location. But of course, there are other locations. A very common one is here, but it's more intimate. Also, the lower back, very intimate. So there are some locations that are some sort of a no-no, not very socially acceptable. So yeah, this was a good compromise, we felt.
Okay, thank you. And so on the same experiment, so I feel like with everything related to temperature, and especially because at some point you mentioned like preference from the participants. Some prefer hot, some prefer like cold. But I think that and I wrote this in my report. So I think that it can depend on the season. For example, in the summer, when it's very hot, I really appreciate to have cold feedback, and nowadays I prefer to have a little hot feedback. The first thing I do when I arrive in my office, especially because I come by bike, is to make a hot tea, and I just have my hot tea in my hands and I feel better. But I don't do the same during the summer, So,
I can see that.
yeah. So do you think that it can influence this kind of result?
Well, yes, the obvious answer is yes, I think, but we did try to reduce bias as much as possible. So the room itself, like the ambient temperature, was controlled at around 22 degrees Celsius. Also, we actually, the experiment itself was pretty boring for participants because we asked them to wait a long time between scenarios just to make sure that their temperature was going back to the basics. And so I think it does have an impact, but we try to reduce that bias. Also, during the experiment where I had participants touch the feedback, it was in a similarly temperature-controlled room, and it was in the summer also, and they ended up preferring the warmth. So I think it does impact preference, but there's this idea that when you're stressed, your body heats up. And so I think maybe it heats up a bit less when you're in a cold room, or it feels less warm because you're in summer. So there is some bias, definitely, but yeah, I think it would be interesting to compare, but that's a very long study. Yeah.
Good.
I hope I answered.
Yeah, it's a good answer. Thank you. Yeah, so what I noticed as well is that you did a lot of experiments, and several of them are about temperature feedback. So you show an influence on persuasion, on empathy, on stress. But how does this combine together? Because if you give like warm, people will feel stress, empathy, and persuasive or whatever. So
I think it's on the enhancement mostly. So if it's also a lot about the context. So if you're feeling stressed and too warm and you add warmth to that, it's not going to feel super good. But if you're feeling like at regular or a bit cold, then warmth is going to help with that. It's the idea of thermal comfort. I didn't present it because there was already a lot of concepts, but it's a very common theme in the literature of, well, the idea is to go back to your baseline of thermal comfort. So if you're too cold, then warmth will help. If you're too warm, cold will help. And generally, if you're at a neutral like baseline, then warmth will feel like slight warmth will feel more comfortable because we associate it with positive themes. But if you're feeling too warm, then cold would help more. And also, if someone is trying to persuade you and you're feeling more comfortable, then maybe that person looks more persuasive. But if someone is looking like it's trying to be your friend, he's trying to be your friend, and you're feeling more comfortable, maybe that person looks more friendly. I think it's a bit about you're more comfortable, and so you're more open to what's happening, maybe. Well, I don't have answers, but I have a lot of theories.
Yeah, that's normal because he didn't do experiment on this, so it's good to have ideas on what you could do in the future, maybe. So, and it's included in your perspective, so it's good. So thinking about this, I was wondering, because one of the good thing, or sometimes bad, but it's a property of thermal feedback compared to like vibration, for example, is that it's much slower pace. It is difficult to change the temperature of the device fast, and with perception, we perceive it very slow as well. So does this stimulation need to be noticed by the person, or it can be subconscious? Like very slowly, you don't notice that it's getting hotter, like the frog story and so on, So what's your take on this?
Well, a very interesting question. Actually, during the 5th experiment on social touch, there was also, I measured whether participants noticed the touch. So if they because some people weren't looking when the agent touched them. So for the visual touch, obviously they were moved into the no touch condition. But for the haptic condition, if they didn't notice, well, they were still touched. So, that effect, it still had an effect. I think about, so out of the 17 participants that were haptically touched, 5 didn't notice. And so I think it's obviously too small a group to have any conclusions, but there was still an effect. And while it didn't, because I measured with the camera, but also I asked them, and so they both answered, no, I didn't see anything, I didn't feel anything. And it still had an effect. So I think the unconscious can be a part of it. I think there's the question of the conscious and the unconscious. Yeah, I think they can both play a part of it during the scenario itself. So yeah, again, I have more experiment ideas. But
yeah, good. So I have time for questions. Yeah. So I was wondering something related to both the bystander experiment and the presenter experiment, because in both situations, the person being harassed was virtual. So what do you think about like what would they do something different if it was a real person or somebody virtual? I guess that you were asked this many times.
Definitely, it's there's a question of gamification. So people feel it's more like a game than reality. It's definitely not reality. Some people try to treat it like reality, but I did notably in the final experiment, I said, like, don't try to force anything. I'm not asking you to be your best actor moment. I'm asking, like, just react how you want to react. Don't think about it. And so a lot of people were like, well, I'm just watching because it's not reality. There's no consequences. Some just try to through the virtual agent. So there was of course a different behavior, and that's also why studying it in virtual reality is interesting, because we can get different behaviors. But I think in virtual spaces, social media, people also tend to treat it like it's not reality. They can be harsher, for example. So cyberbullying can be pretty harsh, and people don't even understand that it's perceived as so harsh because they're not speaking to someone, they're speaking to a screen. And in VR chat, virtual reality, I think we can see some, and I have read some papers where we can see that same sort of behavior of people don't treating it like it's reality. So they're harassing someone, they don't see the problem because it's not real, but it is. It's a different kind of real, but it's still real. And so it's interesting to study that behavior of participants in those spaces. And there's definitely a big bias, but if we're not trying to. My experiments are specifically for virtual reality spaces. So yeah, I think in the context it's expected.
Yeah, because I see two different things. The first one is like the person being harassed is virtual, so a virtual character doesn't have emotions or whatever, you know, so they cannot be harmed in reality. So if the person see that this person cannot be harmed, there's no point to help them compared to if it was a real person behind a virtual avatar. And the second one is you're in virtual reality and you don't know what kind of agency you have on the environment. You know, you will shout at this at the harasser or whatever, but there is no consequence. You know, you can punch them. There is no consequence because it's not programmed to react to that. So maybe people also will not do anything because they will feel that it's useless.
Yeah.
Compared to a real situation in which you know that there will be a consequence, whatever it is, from doing something, you know. So
definitely.
Maybe, but at least it shows a lower boundary because at least if somebody does something in a virtual scenario, yes, they will probably do something in your real setting. So in this case, I think it's helpful.
It helped avoid the ceiling effect of everyone's helping, so no effect. Yay. But also on the second part of, well, there are less consequences, and also people don't know how to do how to interact. I think in this the final experiment, we try to be more proactive in explaining to users, well, you can do anything, you can move, and you can speak, you can try to touch the agents. And then we saw, well, if they did try to help, because in the first interaction with the victim, they could speak to each other. They were maybe touched by the agent. So there was this illusion of agency, kind of, because I didn't put it here, but the dialogue was pretty dynamic. So people felt like they were speaking to someone. And then in the second part, there was the perpetrator that arrived, and you could try to do anything, it didn't do anything. And so we measured also, when did users give up, stop trying to help. Some people stopped very soon. Some people did it till the very end. So the harassment period lasted 2.5 minutes. And yeah, there was a variation of that also. How long are you going to try when you know it's not doing anything?
Yeah, and I guess there is a big diversity in people, like the way they are and what they believe and so on. Some people are very proactive in helping others. You know, so
I think there was less of a diversity here because I wanted to do the experiment outside of the lab, but there were some issues with paying participants. So we did it inside, and that ended up being a lot of similar participants. Of course, we varied ages, etc. And like some are video game fans, some are not. But I think there's still this idea of people are taking time out of their day for this experiment. And so a lot of them are already kind of empathetic people, I think. So there's still bias from this to take it into account.
Okay. So last question. So I will go back to where Kuta started. So sorry, but it's like a last question type, you know. So so do you have like a scenario in which you would include one of your results to because it's a very good thing to try to make VR spaces a better place, but how do you have a scenario how one of your results can help to make VR a better place?
Well, I think right now it's a bit complicated because my what I used the most was thermal feedback, and it's not it's harder to implement because well the usual devices we have are the VR controllers, and they have vibrations, but that's it. And even the vibrations, they're not super complex. So I think there's if I had to choose, I would include thermal feedback. But
imagine there is thermal feedback in the devices.
Oh, okay. Then I would definitely use thermal feedback, I think, along with vibrotactile feedback, because this thermal feedback is very slow. As you can see, as you said, latency can be pretty intense. And so if you want to do anything with notification, pressure, I think vibrotactile and thermal would be the easiest to implement. And you could have the most variations in terms of dimensions you want to use. So for persuasion, friendliness, but also just social touch, I think vibrations and warmth would work well enough. It would be, yeah, I think vibrations and thermal feedback would work, like a simple device of these both would be good enough.
Because I could imagine, like, you know, there is a kind of panic button or whatever, you know, if you feel harassed or if you see somebody being harassed in a virtual environment, you can press the panic button and it could give the haptic feedback to the perpetrator, you know, you could like say, and it could be like something that the perpetrator doesn't necessarily notice, you know, but that can in some way influence the behavior or something, you know. So there can be like scenarios like this.
Definitely.
Maybe.
For example, for the first contribution was the haptic, the modulation of personal space boundaries. And notably, like in the metaverse, for example, there's this idea of a personal bubble that appears and people can't get closer to you. And you could also implement that with the belts. But it raises a lot of ethic questions because here the participants, it was like they consented to receiving the haptic feedback and transmitting to your harasser. Well, he would have to consent to that touch. Previously,
maybe not, because you know you have moderations, you know, you can cut the messages of somebody, you know, you don't have to ask their permission for this, you know, you can show something on the screen, you don't have to ask permission. So why not haptics, you know?
Well, something we didn't have time to implement during the thesis was also the idea of the tap on the shoulder. And so through that, you could maybe transmit different emotions, and notably as a moderator could go like, hey, calm down, or you're doing too much. And but yeah, I also like the idea of the vibrotactile feedback for the heart rate, for the physiology based feedback. I think it's a simple device that can work pretty well in just transmitting stress, just transmitting the idea of, well, someone is feeling bad right now. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, and congratulations again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So shall we go to Ferran? We're doing a smaller.
Okay, so first of all, I apologize for the change of protocol. So normally I should speak one of the last, but I have a small agenda constraint and I need to leave in 5 minutes. So first, apologize for this. And so so this is done at the end. So I would like to thank the reviewers, examiners, and everyone in the jury for the question that already been done and the good question that will come forward. So I'm sure, and I will really will miss those, but I really hope that it will be great. So really rapidly, Jeanne, just a small assessment of your work, because I mean I cannot live without doing that. And first of all, to congratulate you for maybe the survival of the most complex PhD, one of the most complex PhD that I've supervised. I mean, not because of you, it's because first of all, the amount of supervisors that you were with you. So, I mean, we're 5 supervisors, so this is already kind of, I mean, a lot of people collaborating and or following you, or maybe giving you inconsistent comments. So first of all, thank you for having survived that, but also because, I mean, your project was, as you said, it's funded by an European project. So also there were, I mean, I've never seen so many collaborations in a PhD. I think it's really the, I mean, if I count all of them, I mean, you have the collaboration with Maastricht, with Barcelona, with Danilo, also with Emily. I mean, there've been so many collaborations, but not because there have been a lot of collaboration. I mean, you've been actively working on all of these projects. I mean, also I'm really proud of all the things that you've done. So I mean, I think it's great, and also for the personal perspective, I mean, I think it was a pleasure to work with you, and I would also to highlight this last contribution that you, I mean, has been really complex. So you spent time in Barcelona preparing this. It had been conducted in Barcelona, but then you change of plans, and then you had to translate everything. It was done in Spanish, so you need to translate everything to French, and you finished doing this while finishing your manuscript and preparing the presentation. So I mean, this is a really amazing endurance for your part, and I will leave the rest of the other good comments that I'm sure that the other supervisors will do. So thank you again, Jeanne. Jeanne. Oh, sorry.
Wow.
Sorry, I'm going too fast. I'm stressed. I need some relaxing haptics now. So yeah, and an apology again for this small change of protocol.
Okay, I think this is a soutenance with a change of protocol of everything and the change of names. We can't get any names correctly said, so which is fine. So now we turn to Rachel Ackerley. I hope I say it right. Please, Rochelle. Oh,
Rochelle. Can you hear me, everyone?
Yeah.
That's good. Well, congratulations, first of all. Thank you for the invitation, and I very much enjoyed reading your thesis, and your presentation was excellent. It's all well written and very well illustrated, and these examples were really, really good today as well. I very much appreciated that. I find the work very novel and original. I think this is the future of haptics, where it's going to go down the emotional road. And I think temperature is the way to go to access the emotional state as well. As has already been raised, it can modulate touch, temperature. And it really is this slower aspect which can then access the emotional domain. And I really liked it that you looked at both positive and negative emotions, and they're both important. And it's just so well covered in the thesis. From where I come from, more of a physiological point of view, you do sense cold more than warm. Warm, as you kind of say, is relaxing. Cold is more salient. It can be more salient because we have more receptors for cold, and the way it's actually signaled is probably different. It's a bit faster as well. So I thought it was very interesting how you use both of these in your thesis, because I think that there is a question there that the body area, it can be very different depending on the receptors you have for touch and for temperature. And it's interesting that, for example, you pick here or the hand, and these are quite different. But I think you considered very well that it's also the social aspect. It's not just the physiology, it's how you use these body kind of areas during interactions. And so how does that change in VR? I wanted to ask you a question about the stomach pressure, because we have found recently that it's actually quite unpleasant, just touch here. Do you think it can convey both positive and negative, or is it mainly more of a negative area here?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I had an example of positive, like the haptic hug. Okay, sorry. Okay. I do think it also depends on the context, because here you have a positive example, but I think it also you use the force differently. Maybe it wasn't very specific on the haptic feedback in the paper, but I think the force was more gentle, more slow. So there's the question of speed, of context, of what you're seeing associated. So like someone smiling to you and trying to hug you if you know them. I think it can be a pleasant feedback. We also we didn't have time, but we nearly had a collaboration with another European partner on a meditative state. And so they did a paper on meditation in virtual reality with like a bubble that would expand with your breathing. And they wanted to add the belt to add, so like this idea of meditating with the belt. And I think that's also very interesting way to use the belt. I think it can also be pretty positive sensation. Like also, compressive force can be pretty positive in a lot of different contexts. For example, neurodivergent people, they tend to like compressive force. It's comforting a bit with weighted blankets, for example. So there have been some studies also on using haptic feedback to bring compression as a way of comfort. So yeah, I think it really depends on the context and the impression of control and the speed. Mostly those three factors.
No, it's interesting. I do wonder if there's differences between the upper body and the lower body as well, because you go for hugs more on the upper body, and maybe something in the stomach. So, for example, if you'd eaten something, I guess that could change how kind of your internal sensing is. If you've eaten something and you feel full and you have this pressure, you could simulate all sorts of different things in haptics here.
Yeah, actually, oh, sorry, go on. There's a paper by someone in the team where they simulated the baby of the belly of a pregnant woman. Well, it's a very different device, but I thought it was so fun. The idea is that the device can expand from the VR controller, and so while you're feeling like you're touching your belly here, you're actually touching here in the haptic sense. And so you feel like your belly has expanded to be pregnant, kind of. And so, yeah, haptic devices can do so many different things, and it can be so fun.
Now, I have a question about the effect of cold, your effect of cold. When you're feeling hot and stressed, cold obviously can help, and that was nicely demonstrated. But I do wonder if you took into account fear, because I wonder if fear would give you more of a colder sensation. And so if some people felt fear rather than stress, do you think that could have modulated any of your results here?
Oh, yeah, definitely. When we were trying to design the experiment, we asked ourselves, well, what kind of emotion do we want to modulate? And of course, stress is an emotion, it's a state, but the idea is that stress, if it's in I'm doing something and I'm stressed about it, then you're feeling warm by it. But if it's more stress, anxious, you're feeling trapped, you're scared, then you're going to feel more cold. And so in that experiment, we specifically tried to recreate a task where you would feel stress in a warm sense, because there have been also studies on fear, social anxiety, all kinds of those factors for stress, and where warmth helped instead. So yeah, it can definitely, it's very context based.
I had a question about, it was more, I think, relating to study 5, but I guess it relates to all of them. But if you change the area of haptic kind of touch that you gave, or haptic intervention, do you think you would augment the effect? Would it increase here? Is it realistic to have a whole hand or a finger, something like that? How did the size of your device actually relate to the interaction?
Well, for the 5th experiment specifically, it was like this area. So for the touch, it was believable. I think it was not realistic because it was not soft like a hand. Like it was a ceramic, so it was warm and some pressure, but it didn't feel like a hand really. So I think the area here could be a bit bigger if you had like the hand differently on the arm, but the size of it was pretty synchronized, I think. But definitely for the contribution number 3, with only touching the fingertip, I think I don't know if it would enhance the effect. I think maybe, but there's so many questions about that experiment. Like, if you put it in the context of the virtual environment, would it change your perception? Like if you were holding a warm mug, like Thomas said. Also, yeah, if you were touching with your whole hands, if there were some experiments also on using the ambient temperature of the room. So doing an experiment in the warm room or in the cold room, how did that impact the perception and the behavior of participants? And so, yeah, I would have to try. But I do think it would have an impact.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. I have just maybe 2 quick general questions. One would be, how do you think the effects could change with age? More because from my perspective, it would be when you get older, you tend to have a decrease in your sense of touch. You lose receptors, you lose your temperature and your tactile capacities. But we found that affective touch increases the appreciation of touch. So I'm just wondering what do you think you would predict with an older population here? Do you think you could apply the same things or not?
Well, that's a complex question. I do think it could work pretty well. There's also, like, if there's a problem in perception, you can always change it. That's also why I like Peltier cells, because they're so variable, modulable. So you can definitely change. In the 3rd experiment, we did some calibration of just to make sure that the perception was the same for everyone. And so we had some pretty big differences among participants. Some even went up to 42 degrees Celsius, which is, I think, pretty high.
Top.
And yeah. So I think we could make sure that everyone perceives it, regardless of different factors. If it was a device that was worn by users, I think like any other device, there would be a calibration phase. So like when you're wearing your VR helmet, you're going to calibrate the floor. Well, similarly, you would calibrate the temperature. And so I think that would be a non-issue, kind of. Well, of course, there's a question of latency and perception, which is a different issue. But yes, this also is true that older people tend to be more receptive to affective touch. So maybe they would compensate each other, but hard to say without knowing.
No, thank you. It's a good answer, because it's difficult to know. We don't know. I think you could do experiments exactly there to see, and I couldn't necessarily predict the outcome, if it's kind of compensation or not. And just a final question, do you think you would expect the same results in augmented reality, or do you think you would see stronger results if it's more kind of realistic?
That's also a really good question. well, of course, I don't know, but I think maybe it would be stronger because well, it depends on the augmented reality itself. Would you use a virtual agent? In that case, I think it would be lower, maybe, because the participants would be less immersed in the virtual environment, and therefore the virtual agent would appear less real. Well, I'm not an expert in AR, but and in the other sense, if you would use a real person instead of a virtual agent, then maybe that effect would be stronger. But well, again, theories.
No, very interesting. Very nice answer. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so thanks, Rochelle. So now it's my turn before handing the floor to all your advisors. So I'm going to ask some questions. First of all, some of your choices for the experiment, because from what I understood, first of all, most of the time the participants are seated. They can't move. I mean, except maybe in the last environment. So this is why, because I mean, you could see if they were moving forward, backward, moving away, and things like that. And related again for your choice of experiments is mainly a lot from what I understood, except from one of your answers. But from the description of your manuscript, I understood it was more like third-party experiments where the participants were watchers. They were not active participants. And that changed a lot, I would say. Okay. And after a third question related to that is, so you look at touch, social touch. But social touch, you can have very different type of touch. It's not on-off. You can have caress, stroke, tap, and things like that, small taps, big tap, hug. So you do have maybe a hug with a belt, but I'm not sure that was used for that, but it could. But so why was that? Why not considering different type of touch, which is linked to different function of touch? So yeah, so all those questions, and it's not just understanding your choices. It's not making any positive or negative statement at all. I mean, just understanding your choices. Please.
Thank you. So first question was on the why participants were seated. Yeah. So there were some technical restraints of we don't want participants trying to walk away.
Well, if they were scared for the first experiment, maybe that would have been a good answer. I mean, no?
I mean, they had the button to stop the agents. But we did, well, in that experiment, yes, we wanted to root them in place, actually. We didn't want them to move because we wanted to measure when they would stop the agents. And so in that experiment specifically, we had to make sure that participants wouldn't move because that way it was the same distance for everyone when the agent was stopped. So for this experiment specifically, does that answer? This experiment, there was participants moving was not a priority. And this experiment, it was half technical restraints of it's easier if participants stay in one place. And also we wanted to make them part of the audience. So as you can see here, there were some other colleagues that were part of the audience. Those colleagues were not very nice to the presenter. And there was also this question of, will participants identify more with the presenter or the colleagues? And they're not seated together, but they're still seated and looking at the presenter. So this kind of this separation between them. Final seated contribution. This one, well, similarly, I don't think it was of interest. Yeah. I hope that answers
Yeah,
your
absolutely.
question.
Yeah.
Second question was on more of being a bystander to a lot of experiments.
Mhm.
Well, it's true that participant behavior causes a lot of biases. So, for example, when, like in the fifth contribution, the final contribution, when participants could move, could interact, we actually had to make sure that their interaction had no effect on the consequence scenario, because that would induce bias for the rest of the results. If you doing something has an effect, then you're more likely to do something more. And so we try to have this baseline of nothing you do will ever change the scenario. And so,
Well, at the same time, if I can, we can have a dialogue, okay? But at the same time, that impact how the participants perceive the scene and how the participants react. I mean, so
definitely,
anyhow, it's going to have a reaction, an impact.
yeah, there's definitely going to be a reaction anyhow. But well, it was a choice, but I think that choice in this case was also, it allowed us to see how participants reacted to being to having a lesser feeling of agency. So they felt like they couldn't do anything. Did they stop doing anything? I feel like that was an interesting variable. By justifying this particular choice, I think it could have gone either way. But it does make the analysis a bit easier, I think.
That I agree. But I mean, still, I think it could be quite interesting to understand especially because in this particular example, if I understand it's done at the last moment, but nevertheless, so I have two questions. So the first time, the agent communicate, have a dialogue with the participants, so that they're part of the same environment and things like that. But at the same time, when the agent touch the users, if the users were not looking at the agent, they wouldn't notice it. But at the same time, the touch, what is it there for? Isn't it to call for the attention? So why not making a sound or something like that? That here am I. We're starting an interaction. I want you to focus. You did mention like 5 participants did not
perceive it. Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
Salut. Comment ça va?
So as you can see, he did attract them also with sound.
But not the gaze. That would have been another question.
Yes.
He's gazing at his own hand rather than gazing at the person.
Yeah. That's but a lot of people actually because I also measured where participants were looking. I don't have it because that's a lot, but actually less than 10% of participants looked at his face during that particular time. A lot of them were like, oh.
Yeah, exactly. That's why sometimes movement is important.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, in that particular experiment, there was a lot of movement. For the other experiments, I would say it's also because I focused a lot more on perception instead of behavior. This last one was more, can it impact behavior? But the first one was more, does it impact perception? And so for perception, you need less to be part of the story, and it's actually simpler for the participant to be more of a bystander. Also because part of the guest exile project was on participants being bystanders. So we try to include that.
Yeah, that perfectly understandable. Yeah.
And sorry, last question was on social touch.
Yeah, because I mean, touch have a different type of touch.
Oh yes.
And also different function. And here it seems that you're looking at only on-off. That's it.
Well, we also had we also thought about doing some experiments about transmitting different emotions through like having one device for multiple types of taps, for example. And in the end, we decided to focus more because warmth is it's less modulable. So warmth is more, you feel warmth or you don't feel warmth. Well, there's too much warmth or not enough, but generally it's not a super varied perception that we have of temperature. So when we decided to work more with thermal feedback, we also reduced that idea of having more varied types of touch with one device. And also, well, yeah, again, it's a choice. So it's can be hard to justify, but I know that there are a lot of devices that focus on that idea of doing different types of touch. And I think they're also really interesting, but I think it's less my area.
Okay. Now that's it's fine. I mean, we have so many questions regarding touch, so it's not no comment on that. So regarding this experiment and the result, so you find a discrepancy between believable and realistic? It's slide 75. Yeah, that's this one. So first of all, I'm not sure if the results are so are statistically significant, but apart from that. So I was wondering, again, maybe it's my view of touch, okay? 100%, it could be, you know, you come with your own view on addressing a question, a problem. Isn't it that you have two different types? One is more on the touch itself, so the cue, the behavior, and the other one is more on the function. Could that explain these differences? I mean, it's of course it's you don't know, so I mean, it's
yes,
yeah.
I mean, definitely it could. I must say, again the results are very preliminary, so I'm mostly basing what I said on the qualitative part of what participants said to me. So they of course they had comments and we talked a bit. So I'm not sure the results are significantly different, but what participants said to me was when it happened, I was like, oh, he touched me. But then I thought about it and I was like, that's a weird touch. So there's this idea of, well, in the moment you're like, oh, okay. But then when you're asked about it, you're like, it wasn't that realistic.
Yeah. And also because maybe it doesn't follow the social norms.
Yes, that's also a thing of some questions were a bit on both, so it hard.
That explain maybe the comforting and out of place, creepy. Yes. But it's very difficult, I found, when you conduct those experiments to have to ensure that the participants don't feel not too foreigners with the virtual agent to allow touch. I mean, it's not, I fully agree. It's not an easy way of doing it. Yeah. So I don't want to be too late. I may have a small question regarding your first experiment. So first of all, 240 trials. My God, poor participants. Wow, 240.
Yeah,
it's huge.
Well,
I mean, really
mention it, but it's because we had different.
But still,
variables.
I mean, still.
Yeah, it was mean.
that was really.
It lasted 2 hours. It was mean.
Wow. So, two questions regarding that. Did you notice a change, an evolution in the participants' answering question over the time, especially towards angry or over the time? Okay. Oh,
this. I'm sorry, it's hard to read.
Yeah.
But this is a order effect of the trials. So for each, all the trials were divided into 6 blocks. And for each block, they had a specific type of haptic intensity. And so at the end of each block, we asked them like, how intense was it? How intense was the haptic feedback? How intense was the scenario? And they answered from 0 to 10, if I remember correctly. And there was some effect of, actually, we thought there would be a habituation effect, but it was the opposite. People started feeling more afraid of the feedback. So there was, a small effect, but in the opposite direction that we expected.
Yeah, maybe they were aroused more and more. I mean,
Yes,
it's
that makes sense. We didn't account for that.
But, and also, so if I understood correctly, in this experiment, the agent, I mean the virtual agent, were just changing one feature. So now I understand for experiment, sometimes you want to change only one feature. It was the gesture shape, okay? But at the same time, you see a person arriving slowly doing that, it creates a dissonance. So it's not, in one sense, it could look angry because it's doing that, but at the same time, it's working in the neutral step. So it could explain why you don't have so much significant difference between the neutral and the angry.
We have a pretty significant difference.
Oh,
actually.
yeah. So I thought you had
I
none.
didn't present it, so
because
that's maybe why.
everything it says 95%, 90%, or maybe I understood correctly. I didn't understand correctly.
There was a 20% increase.
Oh, okay. But why didn't you change the speed?
Well,
it
allows us for the analysis. It allowed us to have the same.
You would have had like a 2,000 trials. I mean, if you had another variable, right?
Yeah, that's also that. So we also had we already had too many variables, I would say.
Okay. All right. So it so the meta touch. One small question. The meta touch for me. Meta touch most of the time you don't notice it, even in the experiments, in the restaurants, things like that. So that participant didn't notice the meta touch. This is perfect, because I mean it's what you have in most of the. I mean, most of the experiment I've read regarding meta touch, people are not conscious being touched.
But there's also the question of were they conscious in the moment and then they forgot because it was non-consequential.
Yeah, exactly. That is for sure.
Yeah.
But that could be interesting. I mean,
yes, definitely. There's a lot of question in literature of do they need to be conscious of the touch? And so I think we definitely did not answer that question with those contributions, but there's definitely the idea of, well, we also asked them directly about it. Like, were you touched? Did you notice it? Also, they were wearing the device. So I think it helps with being conscious of the touch. But definitely this, I think if we could do the experiment again, specifically on this part, it would be really interesting to see the differences.
Yeah, absolutely. But at this point, I found it very hard. How do you ask participants? Were you touched? That you change completely because they know what you're looking at. So I found it extremely difficult.
Yeah.
Well, if you have any ideas, you write a paper.
You can do it, but haptically is hard because I measured if people saw the touch, which that's easy. But if they felt it, maybe with BCI, but I'm not. We have other people in the team that could talk about that. But,
but even if they notice it, I mean, if they view it, gaze, doesn't mean that they integrated it. So it's still complicated.
I had some participants that actually the camera was turned toward the or like the touch, so they saw it. But when I asked them, they said no, I didn't see anything. So
yeah, exactly.
You can't trust it.
No, absolutely not. It's not because you gaze at that you notice it. Yeah, absolutely.
A lot more questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks a lot. That's what it's a good PhD is for, asking questions. So now I think we turn our thing to you. Okay. So I don't. Are you Claudio?
Yes.
Okay. Claudio Paschiero.
So thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank the committee for being here. You know, it's always a lot of work to read the thesis, come here, ask the questions. So thank you very much for being here, either in person or from far away. So of course I don't have questions. I have more like comments about the PhD. As Ferran said, we are a lot of people advising Jeanne. And actually, Jeanne started to work with us before the PhD. So she was doing her master internship, and then we all fall in love with the topic, and we continued this journey together. And I think we can say how Jeanne improved in how to say, like she matured in from a student that just followed what we were telling to do, in a scientist able to devise and develop her own questions, and she fall in love with all this work, and she had so many things, so many ideas. Then usually we had to say, okay, so you have 3 years, we cannot do everything, but actually she did a lot. She did a lot, and I think it was impressive to see how she could, how you could do in this short time, alone, in collaboration, in different environments. It's very hard to work with so many different people, so many different labs. Everybody works very differently, from the Netherlands to France to Spain. So I know, and that it's very hard, and I think you did an amazing job at managing to make it work, running so many experiments, so many user studies, and all this data to analyze. So it's very multidisciplinary, so you have to get to be expert on so many things, from the mechatronics to the perception part, to running studies, the haptics. So I think you did a really amazing job throughout your PhD. You did an amazing job today. I love the slides, already said. I think they're very, very visually beautiful. I come from robotics, so we are not used to we're not used to this kind of, so sorry for the students. I'm not used to this visually pleasing. Great job, congratulations, and thank you also to you and to also your other advisor for having included me as a hopping guest in the different parts of the work. So thank you very much, and you did a great job. You should be proud of it.
Thank you.
Là, on continue. Ouais.
Allez, on enchaîne Yeah. Thank you, Claudio Pacchierotti.
Very well.
So my turn as a co-supervisor. Thank you very much, Madam President, for chairing this jury, and all the referee and examiners for all this super exciting discussion and questions. You participated to the great exchanges today. Thank you, Jeanne, for this presentation and for those 3 years. A bit more, as Claudio said. I really liked working with you. It was smooth, fluid, very easy to go and to follow. Your personality at work is very easy to work with, super involved, super autonomous, and you never give up. You're very combative. You have a positive mind too, so it's very easy to work with this. Actually, you have a lot of good social skills, right? Like without playing with words, you make contact easily. You are persuasive, and you are friendly, right? So actually, it seems like you are a good fit for this PhD, right? And it seems like Claudio said that you really like this topic, and that once you are on those tracks, and good tracks, you can go very far. Actually, we have this impression, right? That once you have found your way and your direction, then you can go very far with all your good skills. Okay, I'd like to thank also my dream team of co-supervisor, Justine, who is not here today, Claudio, the haptic stars, Ferran, and Mark. Mark was the super director. I mean, what a job, right? Managing this team, and handling this chaotic starting of the PhD defense this morning. So yeah, it's everything, you know, it doesn't show any change in his, you know, mental state in this situation. I don't know how he does this, but probably he has a lot of Peltier cells all around the body here and vibration under his shoes, right? But he's, yeah, thank you very much, Mark. You did such a great job during those 3 years. And I can also mention the Guest XR project, which funded your PhD. So you were also super involved from the very beginning and day one in this project, always ready to participate, volunteering in tasks, which is not always the case. For instance, even tomorrow, you agreed to accompany me to go to Brussels for the final event of this project to make a demo. So it's like super courageous. Thank you very much for this. So you really took your place very naturally in this project. Actually, I think everybody likes you in this project too, and considers your work very carefully and respectfully. You did this great mobility at Mel Slater's lab, which was a great asset in your PhD, I think, and also your visit at Maastricht University. Well, overall, it was a very successful also involvement in this European initiative around the virtual worlds and moderation by means of haptics here. And last, in hybrid team, because you did most of your PhD at hybrid before Seamless, I can testify that you are a super involved, good teammate, also very involved in the task of the team, very supportive with the others, again, involved in the social life of the team. Congrats for everything. Thank you very much. Hoping to follow your path for the next steps. Good luck and congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anatole. Always difficult to speak after Anatole. So first of all, thank you to all the members of the jury, the reviewers, examiner, and the president for being here. And I'm really sorry for our non-French speaking colleagues, but what I'd like to say is a bit personal. And so it will not feel the same in English. So I'll switch for a few words in French, and then I'll do a quick summary in English at the end. Donc, Jeanne, c'est la première thèse qui s'achève et que je dirige officiellement, puisqu'avant, je n'avais pas mon HDR. Et c'est aussi ma première thèse encadrée dans ma nouvelle vie scientifique ici à Rennes. Et donc, ça va faire bientôt 4 ans que je suis ici parce que effectivement, tu as commencé en master avec nous dans l'équipe hybride, parce que c'était la bonne vieille époque de l'équipe hybride. Et je peux d'autant plus le dire que Ferran vient de se sauver. Alors, j'ai pas une très bonne mémoire autobiographique. J'ai une sorte de reset, moi, au-delà de 4-5 ans. C'est assez bizarre. Donc, je me souviens plus très bien pourquoi. Mais à l'issue de ton master, on n'était pas totalement convaincus de te laisser une chance en thèse. Je ne sais pas si tu te souviens. Et donc, c'était financé sur Guest XR. On a fait passer quelques auditions. On a tergiversé un peu. Et on a fini par se décider à prolonger l'aventure scientifique avec toi. Et on ne l'a jamais regretté, je dois dire. C'est vrai que ça s'est très bien passé. Ça a été très facile de travailler avec toi. J'ai quand même encadré quelques étudiants au cours de ma carrière et je peux dire que c'est assez rare de rencontrer quelqu'un qui rédige aussi bien. C'est important. On avait des premiers jets d'articles qui nous arrivaient qui, dans d'autres contextes, je ne fais pas de comparaison, hein, mais arrivent dans un beaucoup moins bon état. Donc, c'était très facile pour ça. Et puis, ce n'est pas juste la rédaction et puis l'organisation des idées. Hein. Tu t'es attelé avec beaucoup de motivation et d'application à tout un tas de choses que tu ne savais pas faire quand tu es arrivé ou que tu ne connaissais pas. Donc, ça pouvait être en psychologie expérimentale, en ferraillant avec de l'électronique ou de la mécanique des interfaces haptiques ou avec des avatars récalcitrants dans Unity. Donc honnêtement, tu donnes l'impression de pouvoir tout faire, ce soit du codage, de la modélisation 3D ou le respect de deadlines un peu folles pour les conférences. Et donc ça a été, c'est un grand plaisir de te voir soutenir ta thèse aujourd'hui. Tu as été vraiment très efficace et tu as su faire, même avec voilà, des dispositifs qui ne fonctionnaient pas ou quand des autorisations éthiques qui est censées avoir été déposées il y a plusieurs mois ne l'étaient finalement pas, et qu'il fallait rapatrier en urgence une manip en France, la traduire, tout reprendre et passer des participants encore la semaine dernière pour boucler. Donc, bon, c'est assez fort, ça. Et tu as su mobiliser autour de toi pas mal d'énergie, collaborer avec beaucoup de monde, donc dans le projet de GuestXR, mais aussi au-delà. Tu as travaillé avec des collègues à Maastricht, à Tel Aviv, à Barcelone, pendant plusieurs mois, à Sienne, et au sein de l'IRISA également, avec voilà, des gens chez Rainbow pour l'aptique ou PACAP pour l'impression 3D. Et dans l'équipe également, tu as travaillé avec d'autres chercheurs de l'équipe que tes encadrants, pour le stage de Vincent. Et voilà, enfin, tu as su manœuvrer avec 5 encadrants. Ça fait vraiment beaucoup quand ils ne tirent pas tous exactement dans le même sens. Hein, on a encore vu pour la présentation, la soutenance. Mais voilà, tu as su faire avec et c'est très bien. Une autre qualité que tu as, c'est que tu es toujours partante pour de nouveaux projets, pour donner de ton temps, pour participer à l'initiative. Et bon, peut-être parfois même un peu trop, hein, mais c'est toujours mieux dans ce sens que l'inverse. Voilà, donc je ne veux pas être trop long, c'est le moment de conclure et de te dire que je pense que tu as toutes les qualités pour faire carrière dans la recherche. Je te souhaite tout plein de belles choses pour la suite. Et je n'ai pas vraiment de questions pour toi, je vais juste, désolé, résumer ça en très court pour nos collègues non francophones ici. So sorry, what I just said is that despite an initial hesitation about offering Jeanne the PhD position after our master's, we never regretted our decision. And I was praising her great writing skills and ability to tackle new challenging endeavors, like in experimental psychology, haptic interface hardware, and nasty avatar animation in Unity. And I also have congratulated Jeanne on her effective and extensive collaborative work, and I'm confident that she possesses all the necessary skills for a successful research career, and I wish her the best.
Thank you.
Okay, so that concludes this first part. So now the jury will go and deliberate somewhere else. I guess for you online, you know where you have to go. Okay, so yeah, you have to move to the other video link. Yeah, and for us, we go there in 2 seconds, 2 minutes. Yeah. See you. And for us, you stay here for the last stop.
Ah zut. Je vais juste aller chercher mes parents, ils sont allés se balader.
Ah oui, c'est pour ça qu'il y a les... Ah. Ouais, un peu aussi. Non, c'est pas fait encore. C'est pas. Jeanne, il faut avancer. Elle est là. C'est peut-être connecté, mais on les voit pas. Ouais, ça, on les voit pas. Pour les options. Okay, Uta and Rochelle, you are here, right? Perfect. So we can see you, Uta and Rochelle, and we will proceed with the decision. Bon, c'est juste, il faut aller la caméra.
C'est pour rien.
Comme ça, tu peux sur la
Ok.
So, I'm going to read, I mentioned to Kuta that I'm going to read it in French. So, vous avez effectué, Jeanne, vous avez effectué un exposé très clair. Très sympa. Oui, voilà. Jeanne, vous avez effectué un exposé très clair, très bien illustré et avec beaucoup de passion de vos travaux de recherche. Vous avez montré de nombreux exemples tirés de l'état de l'art et de votre propre recherche, illustrant de manière pertinente vos travaux. Nous, le jury, soulignons la grande pédagogie à laquelle vous avez exposé vos problématiques de recherche et vos approches. Nous avons été impressionnés par l'originalité de vos travaux, abordant à la fois la réalité virtuelle, le toucher social, le haptique et les interactions humain-agent, mais aussi la notion de perception et l'approche expérimentale. Vous avez su mettre en avant vos contributions innovantes, aussi bien au niveau méthodologique qu'expérimental, dans l'étude de l'impact du toucher social durant les interactions en réalité virtuelle. Peut-être que le français, on pourrait le revoir un peu, mais ça sera après. Chacune d'elles est motivée, argumentée et validée à travers des expérimentations. Vos réponses aux très nombreuses questions du jury ont permis de démontrer à la fois l'ampleur de vos connaissances, de vos domaines de recherche et la solidité scientifique de vos argumentations. La discussion a permis de mettre en évidence votre engagement, votre exigence et votre maturité scientifique. Pour toutes ces raisons, le jury, donc nous, décidons de vous accorder le grade de docteur de l'Université de Rennes. Voilà. Il y a encore one last steps. You need to read the sermon, please.
So, thank you, Madam President, and thank you, everyone. So, in the presence of my peers, with the completion of my doctorate in computer science, in my quest for knowledge, I have carried out demanding research, demonstrated intellectual rigor, ethical reflection, and respect for the principles of research integrity. As I pursue my professional career, whatever my chosen field, I pledge to the greatest of my ability to continue to maintain integrity in my relationship to knowledge, in my methods, and in my results. Thank you.
Now this is end. This is the end.
Thank you, everyone, for being here.
Thank you very much, Kuta and Rochelle. This is very nice. Hope to see you in real life.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Bye bye.
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 I'll say it in French because my family mostly speaks French. Merci tout le monde d'être là, ça fait super plaisir. Ça fait du bien d'avoir fini. Merci à mes encadrants d'avoir été des super encadrants. Il y en avait 5, mais ça marchait bien. Enfin, personnellement, j'ai pas eu l'impression de faire tant d'efforts que ça. Bon, à la fin, c'était compliqué, mais c'est parce qu'il y avait toujours une personne qui manquait pour la relecture des slides et ils n'étaient pas d'accord. Mais, mais généralement, ça se passait bien et c'était vraiment un plaisir. Il y avait tellement de choses à apprendre et j'ai l'impression d'avoir appris beaucoup et j'ai tellement d'autres trucs à apprendre. J'ai hâte. Merci aux gens de l'équipe. C'est vraiment une super équipe. C'est vraiment un super labo. C'est vraiment un super sujet. Enfin, il y a beaucoup de trucs qui sont super ici. C'était vraiment un plaisir d'être là. J'espère revenir un jour, on verra. Et puis, ouais, tellement d'autres choses à apprendre. Peut-être le BCI un jour. Merci à mes co-collègues du 3e âge. On a bientôt fini. on a survécu ensemble, surtout la fin. Merci à mes amis d'être là. Et puis quand même, ils m'ont supporté quand j'étais vraiment fatiguée du travail. Donc, merci pour ça aussi. Et puis, merci à ma famille, ceux qui ont pu venir et ceux qui n'ont pas pu venir. Et puis quand même, mes parents et ma petite sœur, faut quand même les remercier, quoi. Donc voilà, merci à tous d'être là. Quoi? Ah oui, il y a à manger. Il y a à manger, il y a à boire. C'est la salle Saint, mais ceux qui connaissent pas, on fera un petit troupeau.